All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's pre-lock show for NBA. I know it's a Thursday, it's a football night. Everybody's looking at football, but those of you who are here are the real ones. I appreciate y'all. Harlock, good to see you. Theo, agreed. Let's make it happen. I'll start off by just saying this is DFS Army's optimizer. This is Domination Station. If you're interested in having access to this at any point, you can click the link in the description. Promo code BOB for a 10% discount there. If not, that's fine too. But let's jump into it. I'll exit out of Discord. That's getting loud. Jump right into this slate. It's an interesting one. A nice 4-gamer. I like 4-game, 3-game, 5-game slates. I wish we didn't have a late one, but it's fine. It's fine. My favorite games are, of course, the first 3. The final one isn't as exciting for me, but there's still some plays from that. We'll start off with the Pistons going up against the Hornets. When it comes to injury news here for the Hornets tonight, or for the Pistons, not really anything overly interesting. Nothing really stood out. The main thing here is just that this is a pretty solid matchup against the Hornets. They haven't been quite as bad defensively as they have been historically, but they're still not a good defense by any means. And so I am not afraid to target players from this game. In fact, I really like it. So Cade Cunningham, I have a 20% min on. He's showing up around that amount already for me naturally, around 33%. So I should be over the field there. But I put the 20% min there just because as I continue to make changes, I want to make sure I don't lose exposure to him. That was the key takeaway for me is I like Cade Cunningham. I want to make sure he shows up in my lines, at least around field weight. And then I get the Hornets have been a little bit better against bigs this season. If no one else is going to do it, we literally just saw Jalen Duren have 50 fantasy points the other night. He has a ton of upside in a pretty neutral, if not positive matchup. I think it's positive still. And so Duren is someone I want to be significantly over the field on. I have a min on him. Tobias Harris. I like the matchup. Price is solid here. I have a 20% min on him to make sure he's showing up in lines because I wasn't getting a lot of exposure to him naturally. So we see Cade showing up. We see Duren showing up. We see Tobias Harris. And then Ivy and Tim Hardaway Jr., they're viable dart plays, dart throws, but they weren't guys who really stood out for me too much on this slate. So I didn't force exposure there. But yeah, I like the Pistons. Long story short. The Hornets. All right. I know a lot of people were pissed off of LaMelo. He got benched in that last game. If you watched this show on Tuesday, we told everybody we did not like the matchup against the Nets. And Brandon had 1% LaMelo. By the time we got to lock, I also only had 1% LaMelo. It just wasn't a great matchup. This is another spot where LaMelo, the matchup's not great. I am a Hornets fan. I like LaMelo more than anybody else probably out there. I feel like he has the kind of upside that Doncic does. I know that sounds freaking insane, but I still believe it. I'm delusional. I'm aware of that. But I don't let my fandom bias me when it comes to DFS. I'm aware this matchup is not great from a DFS standpoint. He's 9,500. We need him to score around 57 fantasy points to pay off that price tag. He has that kind of upside, but we usually see it in softer matchups, faster paced games. And I don't know if the pace is going to be there. It's the second to lowest total on the slate. The spread is close. We saw this game be really close last time around. That's kind of the only reason I would look at LaMelo, but I have him as the thumbnail. That's more of a bait and switch. If people are like, I just want to see who he likes. That's not it today. I don't like LaMelo, but he's still showing up naturally in about 31% of my lines. I'm not going to X him out. Instead, I forced exposure to other studs to try and get my exposure to him to lower a little bit. And so I'm going to be under the field just naturally, but not my favorite spot for him. When it comes to injury news, though, that's what's really going to dictate what I do with the Hornets. Miles Bridges is listed as questionable. Thankfully, this is the first game on the slate, so we should get this news in time. If Miles Bridges gets ruled out, Brandon Miller becomes a priority for me. LaMelo Ball becomes a better play because his usage rate increases. But still, I'm not going to go on my way to target Ball. I'm just going to have however much the DS gives me. But Miller is someone I will force in the lines. Grant Williams is the guy I will force in the lines. And Diabate is someone that I would be open to having exposure to just because of the increasing usage he would see as well. And his minutes should solidify. I think we have him projected for 15 minutes now. I would expect that to probably go to like 20, 23 minutes if he gets ruled out. Still don't love that play, but he becomes a bit more viable. But yeah, I like this game, but if Bridges ends up playing, I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to the Hornets outside of Brandon Miller, who's showing up for me over the field already. Like I said, if Bridges is ruled out, that only goes up. LaMelo, I don't want to have a ton of exposure. Ideally, that falls a bit. I might even put a cap on him to force my lineups to get even more different just because of how chalky he is today. I'm not going to X him out, but I'm considering like a 20% cap there. We'll see how that goes. Grant Williams, he's showing up already over the field. I'm comfortable with that. The Wings have a relatively soft matchup against the Pistons. And then Miles Bridges is showing up in about 20% of my lines currently. I'll let that roll for now, but obviously if he doesn't play, that's not going to happen. Tobias Ick. Harlock, I feel you. I never like playing Tobias. I never do. But this matchup, it's hard for me to avoid. I just want to have some exposure. 20% isn't too crazy. I'll probably do 20% and 20 max too. It's not that bad. Now, 50, 60% Tobias and chalky Tobias is always bad. Like, I'm not doing that. William, let's fucking go. Agreed, man. Let's get it going. Tattoo, you're right. This is not hockey. I'm looking forward to talking some football with you, though, on Sunday. It's going to be a good one, I hope. I already know. Panthers going up against the Chiefs is going to be brutal. It's going to be freaking brutal. Don Juan, good to see you, man. You said it's been a brutal 2 weeks. I feel like, for me, it's been pretty... I haven't been like as available as I would like to be, unfortunately, but the slates I've played have been pretty solid. I think on Tuesday we hit on MPJ, that crushed. That helped a lot of my lines because no one else was playing him. But I know some of the chalk did hurt a bit that night. But for me, it's always just hitting on these low-owned guys. I won't hit on all of them, but just having exposure to lower players, like lower-owned players, just allows my lines to be more positive more often than not. Yeah, we're not doing that. Just like 20%, 20 to 30, nothing too wild, all right, let's see here. So that's pretty much it. Let's keep a good eye on the news, and hopefully we get that Bridges news while we're live, and we can make some live adjustments there. This is where I'm getting weird, and there's injury news here that we have to watch out for. But this is the highest total game on the slate. You all know I am forcing exposure to the highest total game on the slate. That's what I do every time. It's just rinse, wash, repeat. And we're not seeing a lot of ownership here. If I told you at the start of this season that LaMelo Ball was 100 cheaper in salary than Anthony Edwards, and he's seeing significantly more ownership, y'all would look at me like I had two heads. But that's what we're doing on this slate, apparently. People are not playing Anthony Edwards in a pretty solid matchup against a really bad Raptors team that's been keeping games closer than people expect. And so you're not going to catch me not playing Anthony Edwards here. He hasn't had that explosive season that everyone thought he was going to have, but he still has 50, 60 point upside. And this is a spot where I want to be significantly over the field on him. I really like Anthony Edwards. I could talk for hours about how much exposure and how much I like having him in my lines tonight. Over Ball. Yeah. That's pretty much the biggest thing for me on this slate. We do have a big injury news here. Dante DiVincenzo is questionable. Mike Conley is questionable. If they get ruled out, we have to look at our guy Nickeil Alexander-Walker at 4,100. Low usage guy typically, but if these guys are out, both of them, he definitely becomes a bit more viable. If just Mike Conley's out, he's still playable at 4,100, but I'm a little bit less excited because DiVincenzo to me is someone I would look to make sure I get into my lines a bit more. You're right, man. Randall does suck, but he's been a little bit better here lately. Let me double check and make sure that's true. But yeah, I think he's been a bit better over the last few games. Yeah, he had a 50-point game against Phoenix. For me, if at 8,300, 10% ownership, look a little bit closer at this spot for him. You know what, Don Juan? I want to say thank you. because I actually do like this spot for Randall. Again, I'm trying to force exposure to the highest total game on the slate. Raptors played a pretty quick pace, so let me double check that. Yeah, pace is solid for both the Raptors and Minnesota. No, their pace isn't great, but this is a pace up spot for the Timberwolves, which is why I want to play the Timberwolves tonight. And so I like Randall too. I know I just said it's kind of like, who am I thinking about? Is it Duran? Yeah, it's just like Jalen Duran. Like, he just had a big game and no one's playing him. I don't get it. Randall just had a big game and no one's playing him. I don't get it. I like these guys. Rudy Gobert's even viable, but for me, I'm not going to force that. He shows up naturally in about 23% of my lines. Anthony Edwards, I forced exposure to, so he's showing up around that amount. Naz Reid, I'm not going to force exposure to. And then Mike Conley's questionable, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But for me, it's forcing exposure to Anthony Edwards, forcing exposure to Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert showing up naturally, and then we have to wait and see what the injury news does here, because I think that really does impact this slate a lot in regards to not being a very viable value option on this slate, which makes all of the pay up options more viable. Whereas right now, you're looking at guys like LaMelo because he's only 9,500 and you don't have to pay like 10, 11K for him. So I think that would impact the way we do things here. All right. Next up, we have the Raptors. This is a situation that also will impact how this slate goes for me. Scotty Barnes is listed as questionable. He still has that eye injury he's going through. If he plays, I want some exposure just because of his ownership. 8,700. He didn't hurt. I mean, having an eye injury impacting how you see, I don't really know. I doubt at this point it's impacting how he sees things, but who knows? It could. But it's not an actual physical injury. So assuming his eyesight is fine, I'm more than willing to play him here, even in a tough matchup, primarily just because no one else is going to. Not going to go crazy on a play like that with a guy being questionable and returning after being out for a while. He'll probably have limited minutes, something like that. But 5% for me is enough. And then if he's out, we already know what to do here. We play RJ Barrett. It's pretty much RJ Barrett. It's really the only guy I would force exposure to. You could consider some of the other starters, but they don't stand out for me quite as much as RJ Barrett would. Quickly's out. We've known that for a while. You know, that makes the starters a bit more viable. But the big piece of news we're waiting on here is Scotty Barnes news. I don't have very much exposure to the Raptors right now outside of Scotty. But that will change for sure if he does get ruled out, like I said. All right, let me see. Are y'all saying anything? Oh, Scotty's in tonight. Scotty's playing. Thank you, guys. You all are letting me know. But a minute's limit for Scotty. Thomas, good to see you, man. No worries. Like I said, I'm going to have a 5% min on Scotty. He's going to be in 5% of my lines. Good to know he's playing. It does kind of make me a little bummed out, though, because I was hoping RJ Barrett would be a really good play in that spot. But not going to force... RJ Barrett's just a little bit pricey for his usage rate going down with Scotty Barnes returning. So yeah, it's hard for me to get excited about that. We never know what minutes limits mean these days because coaches always lie. All right. Next up for the Jazz, we have, let's see, who's playing tonight for Utah? For Utah, we have Walker Kessler out. Jordan Clarkson's doubtful. Nothing really too wild here. I think the big piece is just that John Collins continues to be extremely viable in a softer matchup than it looks like it is on paper. Lauri Markkanen has been looking pretty good. So he also is a very viable play on this slate. The big piece of news that we're looking out and watching out for is that Jordan Clarkson is doubtful, which means we have to consider some of these god-awful guards on the Jazz. Guys like Colin Sexton are looking like super chalk. Keontae George is someone that is a viable play. because Clarkson's out, he sees an increase in usage. Other guards, I mean, you can look at Isaiah Collier. He didn't really stand out too much for me at this point, but he's more viable. But yeah, I mean, with Clarkson being doubtful, we can basically assume he's going to play at this point. Or he's not going to play at this point. And so I do want to make sure I have a little bit of exposure to Keontae George. I want to be around field weight. 10% is enough for me. Not a player you want to get too wild with. And then Lauri Markkanen shows up naturally as a player I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. Sexton shows up naturally a lot. John Collins shows up a lot naturally. These are guys I did absolutely nothing to in the DS. The one thing I did do, and I touch on this sometimes, is I put an 80% exposure maximum on Lauri Markkanen. And so I like Lauri tonight. He's 7,100. He's not that expensive, he's starting to get into better form, like I said. But with him being 26% owned, I didn't need him in 99% of my lines. Having him in 80 feels a bit more balanced and a little bit less crazy. So yeah, that was pretty much my approach there for Markkanen. And then, yeah, I like Collins. I like Sexton. I mean, I never love Sexton, but because Clarkson should be out, it makes a lot of sense for me to play him on this slate. And so let's see. Does anyone else show up for us? Keontae George. I put that. Where did that min go? That's wild. Okay. 10% min. Stay. All right, cool. So that's pretty much it for the Jazz. I like them, though. They're showing up a good bit. Second highest total game on the slate. Close spread. No reason for me not to go there again today. Yeah, you can't trust them. It's hard to trust Lauri, too. It does. It makes me feel like I'm chasing a little bit, but at 7,100, he had that 40-pointer against the Lakers the other night. The matchup against the Spurs is relatively soft with Victor, Sohan, and Vassell all being out. So it just makes him a bit more viable going up against these bad teams. And at 7,100, he's just not that expensive yet. We've seen him in like the 8K range before. I wouldn't pay that for him on this slate, but I wouldn't say he's like the most trustworthy play in the world, but I'm going to play him today. Let's see here. Yeah, Harlock. You just can't trust him. Yeah, William, you're right. Jakob Poeltl has been crushing. He sees a really, really high usage rate with Scotty out and with Quickly out. He still sees an increase in usage with Quickly out, but it's a little bit lower with Scotty coming back in. And that's because Scotty's just big. So he takes rebounds from Jakob. He takes increase from Jakob. And so I don't like Poeltl's price tag at this point, and his ownership is just higher than I would like for it to be. But it's the highest total game on the slate. And so, you know me, I'm not going to talk you guys out of playing guys who are in that game. But I didn't personally. All right, let's look at the Spurs. I just went through who's not playing for that team when we were looking at the last one. But let me see if I missed anybody. I feel like I'm losing my voice a little bit, not going to lie. So yeah, Victor's out. Yeah, I touched on all the guys. And so because of the injuries that they have, that's what's making this team viable. Also, the Jazz are a god-awful defense. And so this is a team that we can look to attack, even with players who aren't that good. And so or at least I am making sure guys like Castle and Collins and Chris Paul, and Charles Bassey, all these guys are going to show up a good bit for you. Bassey's showing up in a ton of my lines. I'm going to do exactly what I did with Lauri and put an 80% cap on him. I just don't want him to be in every single one of my lines, but he's a great play at his price tag. He'll still see plenty of minutes, even with Zach Collins playing tonight. And so, yeah, he'll still see plenty of minutes. Zach Collins, though, is someone I forced exposure to. With Wemby out, he sees plenty of run. And so I wanted to make sure I forced some exposure to him in a really soft matchup against the Jazz front court with Kessler out. And so, yeah, you see Bassey, you see Champagny showing up around 65% for me. I like being over the field there. Chris Paul is showing up in a lot of my lines. Didn't have to do anything to force that. The Spurs just make sense today. And I'm not going to overthink that. I'm just going to let them show up where they do. I did force Zach Collins because he wasn't showing up as much as I would like. And then Keldon Johnson and Harrison Barnes aren't showing up as much for me, and I'm not going to force that. I might look a little bit closer at Keldon Johnson, though. Let's see. Am I missing something? Yeah, he does have one of the tougher matchups. Hasn't shown a ton of upside at 5,300. We haven't seen. He did have a 40-pointer fantasy point game against the Timberwolves the other night, but nothing else. Yep, I agree, Jake. That's how I'm liking it. Those are exactly the players I'm really prioritizing. But yeah, I like the Spurs. I'm not going to force in Keldon Johnson. He's not a bad play. I'm just not going to do it. Harrison Barnes, again, not a bad play. These guys see minutes. Keldon Johnson has a decent points per minute, but they didn't stand out for me originally, so I'm not going to force exposure to them now. So yeah, Spurs are good tonight. And then the last game on the slate, Magic against the Lakers. This is where it gets a bit more gross. We know Paolo's out. That's not new information. Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable. I don't believe we've gotten that news yet. I'll double check. I'll refresh. Yeah, we haven't gotten anything on Wendell Carter Jr. If he gets ruled out, that makes, Goga slightly more viable. I know we've been playing him a lot. Kentavious, KCP has been out. Kentavious Caldwell Pope is out, not has been. But because he's out and because of the other injuries they have at wing, that's why you're seeing a ton of Anthony Black. That's why we're actually playing some of these guys. I was looking at KCP as a possible leverage play with that revenge narrative. He's volatile as all hell, but he's a guy where I think they would try to make sure he gets some licks in against the Lakers, but that's not something we have to worry about at this point. Franz is showing up for me around 24%. Anthony Black is showing up in about 30% of my lines, so I'm double the field there. That's why I didn't have to do anything to force him. He's in a decent spot against the Lakers here. At that price tag, he just makes sense. When his usage rate is questionable. We've had Anthony Black chalk nights that go terribly, terribly wrong. But when he's not super chalk on the slate, I'm more willing to play him around 30%. I probably wouldn't want to go much higher than like 50. I don't want him as a core player or anything. And then Franz is showing up around field weight exposure. We know the upside he has about Paolo, and he's even a better play if Carter Jr. gets ruled out. So I'm comfortable with that. Another pay up option that's not being talked about a lot. Suggs I wanted to like, but I couldn't find a reason to play him at all. Matchup against the Lakers is tough these days for guards. He's pricey at 6,800. Nothing really stood out to me too much here. It was really just Wagner and Anthony Black for the Magic. Godzilla, what's up, man? Good to see you. Bronco, good to see you too. You doing all right, man? Hope y'all are good. Good to have the crew back. And like I said at the start of the show, on a Thursday. That's what I really appreciate about y'all. Because everyone is easy to be here on Tuesday. When we have a show, it's easy to be here on Wednesday. But when you're here on an NFL day, real ones, for real. So yeah, like I said, Magic aren't standing out for me too much, unfortunately. I like having exposure to the last game on the slate, but it's tough tonight. For the Lakers, let's see, any injury news here? Rui. We talked about it on the show on Tuesday. We totally called it. We were like, if Rui is out, you won't connect exposure. And it was that simple. I had Reeves exposure to make sure I could pivot where necessary, and that went pretty well. It was a good night on Tuesday, like I said. Hopefully, Rui plays, so I don't have to worry about him. But if Rui doesn't play at 5,100, Connect is very viable once again. It doesn't make me happy to say that. I'm not like the biggest Connect fan or anything, but it's a logical play at that point just because of how involved he's been. Solid usage rate. 5,100 is still too cheap for a guy that has 40 plus upside. It's a little nuts when he's seeing actual minutes. So You just got to do it. Ty said, I work at home. I just wait around all day. Ty, good to see you, man. Dave as well. Let's get it. I agree. So yeah, it's weird, guys. Right now, I'm not forcing exposure to the Lakers, but I want to. Because of what you're saying, Emperor KJ. I usually like to try and have some exposure to the last game, but I don't if it doesn't make sense. And so for now, it's just Franz and Anthony Black, which sounds gross, but no one else is really standing out for me. Let's see if I do. Like I said, y'all are here on a Thursday, so I'll show a bit more than I usually would. If I do like a 20% cap on LaMelo, does that allow my lines to just naturally get a little bit different and force in some of these Laker guys? I don't think it will, but I would like for it to. Yeah, they look so much better. Yeah, the Lakers are looking a little scary. Not actually scary, like they're going to win a championship, but I don't know. If Connect sees more time and he really starts to become an offensive threat, it is going to make DFS harder for the Lakers because of that. Okay, let's see. How are these lines looking? So we have Colin Sexton, Castle, Laurie, John Collin. Okay, cool. Bassey. Oh, I thought I put an 80% max on Bassey. That will change things up too. OG said, sup, Jay? Lover as Geek would say. Brandon did a fine solo mission. Thanks, please. Yeah, he did a VIP only mission as well, which was awesome. I wish Brandon was able to be here today, but he's a bit slammed. But hopefully next week we can get back to it. All right, so yeah, we have Markkinen, Bassey, Sexton, Castle, Champagny, Collins, Miller. Okay. So it really just forced in, no? I don't know. I feel like nothing really changed by me lowering exposure to LaMelo. All I had was just like a 10 to 15% increase in my core plays, which I don't hate. I might. The bad thing is the Magic are still just a good team defensively. And so AD still, I mean, if Wendell Carter Jr. doesn't play, the matchup against Goga is a bit easier. I mean, AD is matchup proof. It's just his price tag that makes him tough. LeBron, same story, but still not a great matchup. I think it's just getting cute if I force it. But I would definitely. Yeah, I'm not going to do it, but I would like to. OG said, do we like Connect tonight? Night, I see you. So yeah, I don't unless Rui gets ruled out. Waiting on Rui. We'll get at least 25 matters no matter what. Coach Reddick loves shooters. You're not wrong. I just want a bit more than 20 minutes now. I want that 35 to 38 minutes we've been seeing over the last few games. OG said, okay, so I'm doing the big 100, and I'm just answering questions now at this point, y'all. We've gone through pretty much all the games. He said, okay, so I'm doing the big 100K tournament one line. Who are your two must plays? Must plays? You know, that's not the way I think, OG. But I would make sure Anthony Edwards is there. And I'm leaning towards Sexton. Those are probably like the main two. 1804. Good to see you, man. Appreciate the love. All right, y'all. I think that's probably it. That's really all there is to go over. This is a 4-game slate. There's only so many changes I'm looking to make on it. I am going to keep the 20% max on LaMelo. It's getting a little cute. You don't need to do that. You should just let the DS do its thing so you still have a chance if he goes off tonight, but I feel how I feel. Let's see. Theo said, how do you play the guys who pop in the sim model? All in or sprinkles? Theo, it just depends on the slate. For me, and I'll pull up the sim model because it's a Thursday. Yeah, so like the sim, no one really stood out too much for me here. I mean, Sexton, I just talked about him. Simona likes him a good bit. That's part of what made me look at him. Part of the reason why I like him. Anthony Black, I didn't force exposure to. He's cheap, so like the cheaper a guy is, the easier it is for them to hit 8x. And so if this was like a 8K player and he had a 11% chance of hitting 8x, then yeah, I'll probably be all over that. But because these are cheap players, I don't really feel the need to. And so I just want to be over the field. And so Anthony Black, some model likes him. I'm over the field at 30%, basically. That's me being double the field. I'm comfortable with that. Some model likes Basie, and, we're double the field there too. Good reminder, some model likes Basie, so I'll do 85% max instead. 18.4 said must cores or sub 4K for cheap value. All right, let's see. Cheap value, sub 4K. I mean, I think Charles Basie, whatever it is a very viable option in that value range. Is there anybody else that stood out here? Yeah, no, it's really just Charles for me. And then I touched on Sexton. He's really the only, these two, Charles and Sexton, are really the main two I really like. I do like Castle, and Markkanen and Champagny are fine, but those are like the three I really like the most. It's Charles, Basie is the top value for me on this slate. So yeah, y'all, that's going to be it. I appreciate the support. Like I was saying earlier, let's make it happen tonight. I think it's going to be a good one. And just for shits and gigs, I keep talking about how much I like Anthony Edwards. And since I don't really like the other pay up options, I'm just going to force a lot of exposure to him and just kind of see how this last run looks for me. 80% max on Spurs players, or just let the DS do its thing. I think an 80% max is fine. I don't always do a max on like global for a team, but just because they're not that chalky, where we're seeing like 60, 70% ownership, 80% is still giving me decent leverage, but it's also not going to ruin my night if they suck. And we know these players aren't really good. Chris Paul, I don't think I touched on, but he's showing up around field weight exposure too. Actually, I'm over the field, if I'm being honest. Jake, appreciate you too, man. Harlock said, thank you for the show. I finally got my DFS Army avatar uploaded, so hopefully I'll make it to the top before I die. Let's make it happen tonight, Harlock. It's going to be a good one. Bridge is out. Okay, Steve, let me double check that news so I'm not running with it. That's big. Miles Bridges out. Trey Mann available to play. Sweet. That helps spice things up a little bit for me. Like I said, I doubt, like, that news literally just came out. And yeah, the DS isn't going to update that yet. But that makes Brandon Miller someone I want to make sure is showing up in lines. I'm already over the field on him, and I'm going to keep running until probably 6:30. So he should continue to, his fantasy points should increase. Everything goes up for pretty much all of the starters. I am going to take the exposure max off of LaMelo Ball because he does see an increase in usage with Miles Bridges ruled out. That just makes him a more viable play. I do still like Anthony Edwards more, though. And then Grant Williams is someone who's a much better play. I'm just going to put a 25% min on him, even though he's already showing up around that amount. It's just as I continue to refresh the DS and lines repopulate and re-update, I just want to make sure I'm getting exposure to him, and ideally I'll be significantly over that. And then I mentioned Diabate sees like a small boost. I'll let the DS update that. I was going to put a 5% min on him just so he showed up a little bit, but I don't think I like him more. Like, I want to force exposure to him. I want the DS to update his projection. And then if it happens to put him in a few lines instead of Charles, then I'll be fine with that. But I'm not going to force that because that could take me out of a GPP or something. I'm not convinced he's a better play than the Spurs big. Okay, good. Let's see. Y'all say anything else yet? Yeah, bump to Miller for sure. The wings are just more viable with Bridges out than they were with him playing. They just have a lot of options there. All right, sweet. Y'all have a good one. I'll see you later. Peace out. Let's celebrate.